Let's move this here. Okay. Oh, whoops. Okay, I can't. Why can't I move this stuff? Go. Okay, I can't get it out of the way. And try it over here. Okay. So you can change to like an effect view. It doesn't really change that much because the effect controls are here and the effects are here. But if you go to Window and go to Workspace, there's an effects view where it sort of highlights the effect controls up here and it moves project over there. And then it shows the properties over here. And actually it seems like the effects window is gone. So that's kind of weird. I wonder if that's the right. Let's try resetting this.
That's
what?
The window.
Where is it?
The top window.
Yeah.
Effects and presets.
But shouldn't it be in the workspace? Do you see when I change to effects and I go, suddenly it's not there. I mean, I can bring it back, obviously. So let's bring it back. Now it's down here. It should be like up here. Although now I can't see it because of this thing. Okay. Let's just go back to the default view because it's pretty much the same thing. So let's go to default. Okay, so we have our effects and presets over here. And there's a lot of stuff in here. You can see there's a whole bunch of different sort of categories for different types of effects. And there's a little search bar where you can search for specific effects. And so that can be useful. And then we have our effects controls window over here, which, you know, we can move around and put different places. But the effects controls will show us where, you know, what the different parameters of the effects are. And then we can also animate those effects. So the first one we're going to start with is a lens flare. This is sort of an effect that kind of like imitates what something looks like when you're looking at it through a camera, because the light will reflect and you know, create artifacts in the lens. So we'll do an example of that. So to add this effect, what I want to do is apply it to everything below. And so to do that, I can go to Layer and I can go to Adjustment Layer. And I want to put the adjustment layer below the camera. And I'm just going to name the layer. So let's rename this lens flare. And so anything that we put on here is going to blend with the layers that are under it. And so that's one way of adding an effect. So I'm going to search for my lens flare effect. And you can see there's a couple different ones. There's a blur, which could be useful. There's a distort lens, which could be useful, but we're going for this lens flare. So I'm just going to drag that onto this layer. And you're going to see it just adds that lens flare right in there. And then we can animate the position and stuff like that. But if we just play this, you'll see it's just kind of sitting there. And we can kind of play around with the parameters. So let's zoom in a little bit. And so you can see the flare center is where that like highlight is going to be. So we can move that around and you can animate those properties. The brightness, so we can turn the brightness up or down. We can change the type of lens. So there's a couple different options here that kind of change the quality of the effect. And then we can change how much we blend with the original. So right now it's 0%. If we go to 100%, I guess the original is now 100%. So I guess if we go to like 50, we'll see both. So if we blend all the way, we're just seeing the original, which doesn't have anything on the layer since it's an adjustment layer, so we don't see anything. If we have 0, then we see the full effect. So we can kind of blend the effect in. And so you can use those different things to change the quality of the effect. And so we can animate them here. If I make a keyframe, maybe we can keyframe the brightness. So the brightness can go from 0 to 300. So if we keyframe the brightness here, and then we move ahead to like here, and we turn it down to 0. Now, even though we actually are not using the timeline, we do see that animation happening. So we can use the effects properties window or effects controls window to kind of see, a better view of what's in there. But you can also do that in the timeline. If you open up your normal timeline layer, you can see effects, lens flare, and now we see the keyframes that we just created. So you can edit these keyframes just like you would any other keyframes. So that's an adjustment layer. So we add an effect and it adds stuff under it. So that's one technique for creating special effects. The next technique we're going to go over is adding a brush stroke effect. And this is like stylizing a layer that already exists. So instead of creating a new layer, I'm going to take a layer that already has content on it. So I'm going to take my walk cycle layer. And what I'm going to do is add a brush to it. So it's going to stylize it to make it look like it was hand painted. These filters, kind of sometimes look okay, sometimes look pretty bad. So, obviously, depending on what style you're going for, you may or may not like these. But you can see there's a whole bunch in here of different stylized filters. And then the one we're going to try is brush strokes. So I'm going to drag this onto the walk cycle. Good morning. And so you're going to see pretty quickly what the effect looks like. It kind of distorts the character and it gives it this different kind of look. So it doesn't look super realistic, but we can play around with the parameters a little bit. There's a whole bunch of different parameters. Let's zoom in a little bit and see how they affect the quality. So we can change the stroke, sort of the angle of our brushes. We can change the brush size. So if we have like a really heavy brush, we're going to have more blocky color. If we have a more detailed brush, we're going to get closer to what the original style or lines look like. The stroke length, if we have long strokes, it's going to, be elongated, versus if we have 0, then the effect, isn't actually being applied. We have the stroke density, which, let's see if we can tell what that does. Okay, so the stroke density is kind of like basically blurring it out a little bit. Stroke randomness, so this is kind of how random the positioning of the strokes are. Paint surface, we want to paint on the original image. And then blend with original, if we turn that to 100%, we're just going to see the original. If it's 0, we're just going to see the effect. But something in the middle might actually be effective here. So now we have this kind of like brush stroke effect, but it's blended in with the character. And this is another thing that you could animate. So if we wanted to kind of, transition from stylized to clean lines, I could keyframe the blend with original here, and then animate it to 100% over here. And so we'll see that effect kind of slowly disappear. Let's make that happen a little bit longer. So I'm going to go down here and find my keyframe and drag it out a little bit. So that could be kind of a fun way to transition from one style to another style within the scene. So that's another thing. So we can add effects directly onto our layers to stylize or change the look of a layer. Another thing we can do is add a mask, and we can do different effects with a mask, which will apply the effects to different parts of our scene. So this is a couple more steps of process, but what we'll do is we'll show how to make a vignette from scratch rather than using one of the, there is like a vignette, you can actually see it right here, there's a vignette effect which we could do, but we can create our own vignette using a mask. So for this one, I'm going to get a layer and I'm going to do a solid layer. And normally I would do like black for this, but my scene actually is pretty dark, so I'm going to do maybe like a light gray, just so we can see what it looks like. But a vignette effect is something that a lot of like old films have. It's when the sort of corners and edges of the film are a little darker than the inside. And so it kind of creates this sort of like old-timey look. So we're going to make a solid, and I'm going to call this a vignette. And I'm just going to apply a regular mask here. So if we zoom out a little bit, you can see I just have this solid. It's covering everything in my scene. I'm going to put it below the camera. And I'm going to choose a ellipse. You could do this with different shapes, but you'll see ellipse is usually what we do. And if I draw this ellipse here, you're going to see it creates a little mask here. And usually with a mask, this is because I'm putting it on a solid. So I used a solid layer rather than a shape layer to create the mask. So usually with a mask, or with the default setting, with the default setting, it's set to add. So it just adds this color on top. But if I change this to subtract, now we get the opposite of this look. And what we can do with our mask to make it more like a vignette is we can change the feather setting. So by feathering the outside, we kind of like blur and we create this sort of mask effect. I should actually edit this a little bit. So I'm going to get my selection tool and just move these to the corners to get more of a traditional looking vignette effect. So I really just kind of want the corners, and I kind of over exaggerated the feather, so we can adjust that as well. But this is another effect we can use to get kind of an old-timey look. It looks a little weird with the gray. Usually it would be black, but since I have a black background, maybe I'll change it to black anyway. Okay, so I can get what would look more like a traditional vignette effect, something like that. It's not perfect, but let's just keep going with it. And then I can change the overall opacity, so I probably wouldn't want it to be like completely solid black at any point. So I'm going to set the opacity to 50%. And then I have this shape, which I can also edit. So I can keyframe this, and then I can, move the shape. I don't know why I would do that. Let's expand it. Let's actually just expand the feather. I think that'll be more interesting. So let's undo that. So let's take our feather property and we'll expand it back a little bit. And so we can as the feather expands out, the picture becomes a little more clear. So that creates kind of a nice little film effect. Another thing that I might put on here, which isn't in the class page, but one thing that I really like to do is add noise to everything. So we can add a noise effect on top of everything to get another sort of film effect. So I'll do a adjustment layer, and I'll call this noise. And I guess actually we are going to cover noise. I forgot we're going to cover noise with this sort of smoke effect. But let's just do this, and then we can move on to workshop time. So this noise here, there's a bunch of different types of noise, but I can just add this here. And then we don't see anything at first, but we see there's properties up here. So if I turn up this value, see how we get that nice noise. We can set it to something more reasonable, like maybe 25%. And so now we're going to have this really nice sort of film looking noise on top of everything. and that really adds a lot of texture and detail. That's probably way too much, actually. Let's do 10%, and I'm going to turn off color. And so that's a little more subtle, and kind of gives us that effect without kind of overriding everything. I might even do like 5% on noise. So we haven't really, changed a whole lot going on in the animation, but we have this very new sort of like stylized look to it that may give people more of a sense of, watching an old film or something like that. It is a little inverted because I do have the dark background, so normally it would be like the other way around. Let's see what actually the vignette looks like if I change the color. Oh, it won't let me. Okay. Well, it probably would not look good anyway, so let's just leave that for like that for now. But yeah, so in the next part of class, we're going to cover the particle effect and the smoke effect. So that's kind of like adding new content into the scene rather than just adding sort of effects on top of it. So I'll stop here.